What's up, Fox Down Fox here, and up until this point, the RX 550 was the worst AMD card that I have ever used. But that all changes today with the RX 460, another entry-level GPU by Team Red. It released in August 2016 with a whopping 2 gigabytes of GDDR5. This was an entry-level GPU at the time, and to this day is going to struggle to hang on, though there is a shining light, which will be AMD's FSR software. This GPU has 14 compute units with a base frequency of 1090 MHz up to 1200 MHz on boost, draws about 70 watts of power, which has a minimum PSU recommendation of 400 watts. The certain one that I have today does not need any external power from a 6-pin connector or anything like that, just plugs in and goes, which is always nice to see, and the temperatures were very good. But that's about all the song and praise that I have for this GPU. This video is going to be shorter than most of them, and that's because many of the games that I tested today struggled quite a lot. So let's start off with some modern releases. First off, God of War at 720p, even with FSR on this chip side, failed to run at a playable frame rate. It all depended on where you stood. Sometimes you could see the crest of 30 and sometimes you would see 7. So generally speaking, considering I was fighting a boss and was getting usually about 10 frames per second, I do not consider that to be playable. Another unplayable game is Resident Evil 8, once more at 720p with the performance FSR mode and the lowest possible settings. We saw an unplayable frame rate. Now some parts will be completely playable, 35 FPS to 37 FPS. It's great, but considering the fact that there were other parts which got down to 9 FPS in the Dimitrescu manner means that the actual village as well as other parts of this game are going to struggle quite a lot on this card. So perhaps there are some performance tweaking mods you can get at Nexus Mod Manager that will help you out and achieve that frame rate, but even still, it seems unlikely on this card. I also want to say that I just beat this game and it was pretty awesome and very scary. That baby scene is going to fuck me up for life. But not all hope is lost for modern games. Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, which came out, I think, a month ago, if that, at the very low preset with 75% of 1080p, which is about 810p, averaged 32 FPS in the benchmark, and that was quite surprising. Now, granted, the art style of Borderlands is a bit crude, but nonetheless, I was very glad to see that we got one playable game out of all of them. Of course, where this card does shine is in games like CSGO or Among Us. Among Us ran at 4K or 1080p with an average of 60 FPS. There was no issues running that game. I assume that Fortnite would run as well, especially on performance mode. I don't think you'll have any issues playing it. But for me, unfortunately, it crashed my drivers, which is super weird. But if you want to play some Among Us on the RX 460 or esports titles like Rocket League, you're going to have no issues whatsoever. That's what this card was originally made for, and because esports titles are always non-demanding, I definitely think that you will be able to play esports games on this for the foreseeable future as long as it's updated. Which it seems to be, by the way. I downloaded the Relive capture and it seemed to work just fine. It did give me some issues upon startup where it said it wasn't allowed, but the moment that I ran it as administrator, it ran perfectly fine and told me my drivers were up to date. So I assume that that's correct. If not, I apologize. Let me know in the comments down below. And last but not least is CSGO at 1080p with the lowest possible settings aside from MSAA, which was at 2x and FXAA on. Of course, MSI Afterburner doesn't work for CSGO, but I saw generally about 110 FPS. Sometimes on shoots it would go down to 100, other times it would be at 120, so it all depends on where you are and what map you're playing. For instance, shoots is a very small map, so it's probably less intensive instead of, say, Dust 2, but I think even on those bigger maps you will have a fantastic time playing those games on the RX 460, and that is where the RX 460 shines. So yeah, unfortunately, it seems like this card is not meant for modern games anymore. I knew after Resident Evil 8 that any somewhat modern games would not be able to run on this. I think Fallout 4 and Skyrim will do a fantastic job on this. Older AAA titles will have no issues with this, but unfortunately newer AAA titles will really struggle unless they are hella optimized like Borderlands is. But Resident Evil Village and God of War are just some examples of the games that I try to get running on this, which is why this is a shorter video, because a lot of games give me a lot of issues. I don't think Halo Infinite would run on this thing, along with many other games that came out in the past year or so. I would hate to think of what playing this with Elden Ring would be like. The RX 460 was paired with the 10700 as well as 32 gigs of RAM, so obviously that helped a lot. If you have a 460 along with an i5 2400 or something, the unfortunate thing is you might not be able to go down to 720p without bottlenecking the CPU. So I don't expect you to have a 10700 if you have an RX 460, but if you're looking for graphics cards, seriously, stay away from the 460. The 550 is even better. If you can get a 560, awesome. If you can get, sheesh, I don't even know. I would recommend a 7 series card if you don't mind newer titles not running, but that's kind of the whole point of why the 460 sucks. So it really is a mixed bag at this end of hardware. If you can splurge a bit more, then the GTX 950 would be good. Obviously the 1063 gig, but that's way expensive. Oh my gosh, I got the hiccups. But overall, this graphics card is one that I think you should pass on in 2022. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, like, subscribe. Do what you usually do, and as always, buy yourself something nice. Paces at full-on DirectX 12 games like Halo Infinite, which I talked about a little bit earlier. And Mama didn't raise no B. I'm going to be talking about modern games because that's what I said. An RX 550 and a 4-core CPU will struggle in modern games, but there are some that will run pretty great. Halo actually wasn't an unplayable experience.